So I've just stopped watching a really great podcast with Freddie Sayer, Unheard, his channel Unheard. I'll put a link to it below. He was interviewing an academic called Kathleen Stock, who is talking about the Jason Arday scandal. Jason Arday's a black British professor at Cambridge, famously the youngest black British professor at Cambridge, I think, certainly in that department, in his own department. And there's been a plagiarism row going on, which has opened up a wider, I'd call it a DEI fail story, is what it is really. So that's breaking now. Go and watch the video. It's quite funny in a sad way. Poor chap. He's really getting coming under a lot of ridicule right now. And this will become relevant by the end of this video when we're going to discuss the really unfortunate, unkind and unpleasant effects of diagnostic creep. Because to me, the biggest and most interesting part of this whole story is not Jason Arday's being a DEI hire, being a plagiarist, if he is indeed one. It seems there's mounting evidence of that. Certainly he's clearly not a particularly brilliant academic and has got where he's got through spinning stories. The whole thing was he's been making up really, really hilariously awful lies. He didn't speak until he was 9, he was mute. And that was due to his neurodiversity, which we'll go into. And he ran from Edinburgh to London once in 6 days, which I can tell you, the average person is not going to do that. He went to Africa to put wells in villages for kids and stuff, and the charity involved said no way, he was never there. All this sort of stuff. So it looks like a sort of Walter Mitty or a sort of fantasist type character who's completely hoodwinked the great and the good of Cambridge University. Now, on this podcast, when Kathleen Stock, the academic in question who was breaking this down for Freddie Sayer and explaining how he managed this feat of, I mean, I'm almost impressed, almost sort of due respect, just how much he managed to take these credulous idiots for a ride. I mean, if they're going to set themselves up for this, why not? So in a way, I'm not blaming him. Now it's boomerang back on him now, actually. But when this rigorous academic, Kathleen Stock, was asked, what's the biggest scandal, what's the worst part of this? She said, without doubt, the neurodiversity grift, basically. She didn't use that word, but that's my word, as you'll know from seeing my previous videos. The grift that is ADHD, the grift that is autism diagnoses which are not warranted, because they're not profound autism. This type of stuff, which indeed Jason Arday allegedly did use. And she had a really interesting phrase, I've got it here, about what it was like being a lecturer in the last 10 or 15 years and how the standards have plummeted due to lecturers and professors and supervisors academically being required to dumb down the standards in order to let people with alleged neurodiversity issues through. And she said as follows: lecturers are now routinely expected to make adjustments to their ordinary critical approach as soon as someone has a diagnosis, to ignore spelling mistakes, mentally rearrange sentences without critical comment, try not to mind paragraphs that go on for days or seem utterly arbitrary in their shape. I speak from experience. As a marker, you are supposed to look beneath the jumble of words and find the true scholar lurking shyly within, which of course is not there because this person isn't a scholar. So the problem with, math is racist type nonsense, and in this case, somebody being able to get through an entire academic career when they clearly can't write or think logically and are nowhere even close to the standard of a lecturer, never mind a professor, because they can pull out an ADHD card or an autism card. and say, I have neurodiversity issues, and that's why what I wrote is such a pile of absolute crap. And a university would actually take that on. Now, there's other reasons for that as well. If it had been, presumably a boring middle-aged white guy like me, he probably wouldn't have had, there'd have been no appeal to helping him in his grift. They wanted something out of it, the poor chap. They wanted to use him because he's a charismatic looking 30-something black guy, Rasta with long dreadlocks, and that's exactly what they wanted for some other reason. So they opened the gate and let him through into an arena in which he should not have been, and were able to ignore the absolute terrible quality of the work because he had ADHD and autism. And that's why nothing he writes makes sense. No, the reason nothing he writes makes sense is because he hasn't got the brains to function at that level of academe. And so when people are wondering why we are suffering with mediocrity in government, for example, if you look at the Houses of Parliament, it's a joke. Most of the guys I went to school with are smarter than this lot. And back in the day, this is the bit where I'm going to rant a bit. Back in the day, it doesn't really matter which side of the house. This is not a partisan thing or a political point I'm making. Back in the day, both sides of the aisle in the House of Commons were heavyweights to a significant, at least a significant number of them. There were men who'd been to war. There were women who'd fought their way up before feminism gave any women a foot up. There were, on the Labour side, much though I'm not a fan of the British Labour Party, I think it's been a massive Trojan horse for many fifth columns, hostile state actors, foreign actors to come into Britain and damage our national security. For more than 100 years they've been doing this now. So I'm no fan of the British Labour Party, but grammar school boys from coal mining villages who had serious brains worked their way up through the trade unions and were out there, seriously accomplished guys and women. So back in the day we had heavyweights, and not just your Winston Churchills, like your Edward Heaths, your Margaret Thatchers, your just a ton of think of them whatever you want. They might not be your political cup of tea. They're exceptional people. And now we have absolute mediocrities, total mediocrities. And this is why. Because the standards are not what they were. And when people say that, you kind of think of, oh, we've just dumbed down the standards. No, there's a specific way it happened. It happens for, perhaps with the right intentions, but in a way for all the wrong reasons. It is in order to allow for this increasing relativism. Any diagnosis, invent any new diagnosis you like. There are no categories anymore. No, an autistic person isn't just a young person that is nonverbal and can't process their emotions. If you identify as an autistic person, you can be one, that sort of thing. That just throws the gates open for all sorts of cheating, basically, because of course it is in itself a lie. So all the standards have gone, all the ways of checking and holding things in shape have gone. Before you know it, academia starts to rot. And high-end institutions like Oxford and Cambridge are rotting because of this concept creep around autism and ADHD, and the free passes that are given. And we discussed before how there are, hundreds of thousands of young people who are NEET, not in employment, education or training, off of the excuse of some bogus mental health diagnosis like ADHD or autism. And this is an exactly similar example of how somebody has defrauded the system effectively with a lot of help from establishment figures. But if the framework wasn't there, they wouldn't have been able to do it. Because this person couldn't write like a professor, he had to have his non-professorial writing somehow okayed or ticked. And that the methodology that allowed that is fake mental health diagnoses or fake neurodevelopmental diagnoses. he's got a disability, autism, ADHD. That's why you mustn't judge his writing to the same standards as everybody else's writing. And that allows him to get through the gate and to inhabit a place he does not deserve to inhabit. And once that's happening, where are we? Okay, so the other interesting point that she made right at the end was that the person this is most unkind to is, of course, this chap himself, who should rightly have been told at the appropriate place. You know, perhaps he could have made it through an undergraduate degree, but for all the reasons I just described, almost anybody can now. You know, and we are in England is a country that needs a lot of engineers and welders and you know, probably mechanics and agricultural scientists, or, you know, innovators. We don't need more sociologists. You know, so people who really the only way they could cut it is to do a sociology degree type thing, you know, which is like virtually anybody could do that for the same reason that Jason Arday could, because it just requires a lot of bullshitting, right? That isn't helping anybody. You know, the old Blair government 1990s vision of get all kids to university. Why? Why? A lot of them aren't suited for it. And the way you do that, because of course they're a bit of most people's ability to work at the sort of degree or master's degree level of the 1970s, they don't have it. Most people couldn't do it. So we've brought the standards down. And again, things like ADHD, autism, to some extent dyslexia, has allowed a lower standard of performance to pervade and to predominate. And so we're not going to have the excellence that we used to have. And people who could have inhabited that position, the sociology professor position, I suppose it's not that illustrious, but there could have been somebody who could probably do the job better, who could have inhabited it. And now he has to probably spend the rest of his life looking like an idiot because he was allowed to get away with his bullshit because there was something that the system wanted from him. So all in all, a really sorry tale. I encourage anybody who wants to see diagnostic creep, the insane overdiagnosing of mental health or neurodevelopmental disorders in people. Like I said, I'm working in addiction treatment. We've gone from 1%, 2% of people being ADHD to every single person who applies to us thinks they've got ADHD. They don't even really need to get it, an official diagnosis, because they're just so sure they've got it. Watch so many YouTube videos telling them they've had it. And certainly if they go to a clinical psychologist, they 100% will get it. None of them are coming out of those assessments and the psychologist has told them actually you haven't got ADHD. Just doesn't happen. So we've got this plague of overdiagnosing ADHD and increasing amounts of people or their parents identifying them as autistic when there's no such thing, and increasing amounts of grift of people being given real world benefits they don't deserve, whether literal financial benefits or easy passes through what used to be difficult rites of passage, which used to sort out the wheat from the chaff, not to be horrible about it, but this is life. You know, we don't want, you would strongly encourage your pilots to be sorted out, the wheat from the chaff, and to go through rigorous training. So why wouldn't you every other field of endeavour? We want people to be competent, unless we want a society that falls apart. So this is an absolutely horribly beautiful example of what happens when you mess with categories of things and standards of competence in the name of I don't know what, victim hierarchy promotion, because these are disabilities, of course, supposed disabilities, the invention of new disabilities or more victims, the giving of excuses and free passes to certain disenfranchised groups doesn't help them. Doesn't help anybody. It just makes people resentful. People resent freeloaders. Doesn't matter what color they are. And so it will not help them. It's the cruelest thing, really. Anyway, I encourage everyone to go and watch that video and consider that a very timely, but rather unfortunate example of what happens when people overdiagnose for ADHD, autism, and other supposed mental health and neurodevelopmental disorders.